Washington. So we have staff from all of those areas online. Maybe we could start, if I could just get department staff to come on and introduce yourself. I'm Kyle Addix. I'm the Intergovernmental Salmon Manager for the department. And I'll just go down the list in the order I see people here. Amy. And people might not be back from their break yet, but I'll just keep going down the list. Are you online, James?
Yeah, hey. And Amy's multitasking right now, but I'm gonna just introduce Amy because I know her and hang out with her a lot. Amy's a stock assessment biologist in Region 6, so she's thinking hard about the coast. And then I'm the regional program manager in Region 6. My name's James Losey. So I'm thinking about management of fish in South Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan-Fuca, Hood Canal, and then here we are on the coast. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Do you want to just go ahead and call on, introduce the rest of your staff that's online?
Yeah, I'm looking at Jody Pope right here. So Jody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Pope. I'm the district fish biologist for Willapa Bay.
Thanks. And Mike Scharf.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Scharf. I manage fisheries in Grays Harbor, Queets, and Quinault basins.
Great. And thanks, Mike. And Jenny Whitney got pulled away. Jenny's the district bio for the coast, but she's going to try to join us maybe a little late here. And then there's some other staff that are going to come in and out. Actually, I see Kim, are you available? See, you're on here.
Are you calling on me, James?
I was calling on Kim. Sorry, I sound like Tim. Kim Figler Barnes is here.
Yeah, I'm here, James. I work with Mike Scharf. I'm one of the area bios for Grays Harbor.
Great. And Barb McClellan, I see is here too. Many of you know Barb. You want to say hi?
I'm the area bio for Willapa Bay.
Thanks. And as this list is growing, my ability to detect my team has become harder. So feel free to jump on there if you want. Throw your camera on and say hi. Otherwise, let's switch over to Marlene because she's super focused on this area. Oh, you're on mute, Marlene.
Thank you, James. Hi, my name is Marlene Wagner, and I'm the South Coast Policy Lead.
Okay, I'm going to jump on mute here. Actually, I guess while I got the mic here, little organization, I'll just holler. Ryan, you want to say hi? Ryan has the headphones on, so I know he can hear us.
You're talking to me. I'm not in your region.
Yeah, my region. I think we went through all the region. I'm just saying hi to the other staff. So Ryan, why don't you tell us what you're up to?
I can. Yeah. So that sounds like that's the baton and Mike being passed off. So good, I guess, afternoon, everyone. Ryan Lothrop, the Columbia River Fishery Manager. Most of our staff are out of the Ridgefield office, but we've got some staff scattered about throughout different parts of the state. I'm actually out of the Olympia office. So I will actually go through our participant list and call on the Columbia River folks if I see any, and it'll be alphabetical. So first up is Beth Dacey. She is our, at least I saw her first. Yeah, Beth Dacey. She's our Columbia River Fishery Sampling Coordinator. Beth, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, Beth Dacey, as Ryan said, Columbia River Fishery Sampling Coordinator.
Great. And then an important figurehead of Columbia River, Cindy LaFleur. So go ahead and good to see you here, Cindy.
Hi, Cindy LaFleur. I work in Mitchell Act coordination.
Thank you, Cindy. And then let's see. I'm just making sure I don't miss anyone. Sorry. Quentin, you already introduced yourself earlier, but go ahead and say hi.
Hello, Quentin Doherty, fish biologist at the Columbia River Management Unit.
Thank you, Q. And then I think Tim Sipple, I think you're last.
Oh, Hello, Tim Sipple, Columbia River Management Unit, fishery analyst. Thank you.
All right, and I'll pass it back to Kyle to determine who introduces themselves from here.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think the last two from our staff are Kyle and Erica.
Hi again, everyone. Kyle Vandegraff, Ocean Fishery Manager.
Hi, everybody. Erica Wayland, work with Kyle in the ocean sampling program.
All right, thanks, everybody. Also see we've got a couple of our friends from National Marine Fisheries Service online. Jeremy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kyle. Jeremy Jordan, National Marine Fisheries Service, and I see that John as well.
All right. So we're, as I said, we're here. We typically talk mostly about ocean fisheries in this meeting to set us up for the Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting next week. We do have a couple of our Washington Council representatives online. If they want to say hello, Phil and Butch.
Thanks, Kyle. Phil Anderson here. Appreciate being able to attend.
You're on mute, Butch.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate what all the staff has done so far to get this compiled and get ready to go through the marathon and remind people this isn't a sprint, this is a marathon, and we got a long ways to go. So thanks to staff once again.
And we also have 3 of our salmon advisory sub panel reps to the council online. A couple familiar faces, Dave Johnson.
Hi, guys. Wish we were all together.
Maybe in April. Ryan Johnson.
Good afternoon. Hi, thanks, Kyle. Ryan Johnson, Washington Troll.
And our new Gillnet rep who I actually haven't had a chance to talk to since he was appointed, but Bryce Devine.
Hi there. Glad to be along, I guess. Gonna learn a lot. Thank you very much.
Good to have you here, Bryce. So maybe to start out, I'll just see, we do have a lot of the staff that really know the ins and outs of forecast on the coast and in the Columbia River. So see if anybody had follow-up questions from the morning session that they didn't think of or didn't ask then that they'd like to ask now. Not seeing any questions. Phil?
Just a reminder to everybody that's on the phone, if you're not speaking, to mute your phone or your computer. I see someone with the phone number, the last 3 digits of 409 is not muted, but I don't have any additional questions from this morning's presentations. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. And if I see a number that's given us a lot of extra noise, I might just mute it manually from here. All right, with no follow-up questions on that, maybe the sort of the next piece of the puzzle as we start to plan fisheries is the technical teams do a bunch of work to put the new forecast into our Coho and Chinook fishery models and run those models with last year's fisheries, the fisheries as they were planned last year preseason, run those through the models. Maybe a good place to start is see if Kyle could, starting with Coho, just walk us through what that first model run with the new abundances and last year's fisheries looks like.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I'll just kind of, I guess, start with reminding everyone what those fisheries were. For north of Falcon, we had a total allowable catch of 75,000. South of Falcon had 125,000 coho selective and 14,000 non-selective in their recreational fishery, and then another 10,000 selective in their troll fishery. And treaty troll was at 26,500 coho. And when we ran that, I would say, I guess a very, quick summary would be that it looked pretty good as a start. On lower Columbia natural coho, the total exploitation rate was at 13.5%. Again, the goal or the objective there is 23, so we're well under there. There is a 2/3, 1/3 sharing there, and we're well under on what the marine portion of that needs to be. Moving on to Oregon coastal naturals, we're at 13.9% on that model run, so well below the 15% goal. As we're all aware, queets has been a pretty big driver of our fisheries. In this model run, the queet spawning escapement is 14,464, and do remember that includes interior in-river inputs from last year as well. So no changes to fisheries at this point. That puts our total exploitation rate at 21%, and we have a conservation objective of 68% this year. So looking much better than we have in recent years for sure. Kind of moving along the highlights list, I guess, real quickly, Grays Harbor coho looks much improved. So, feeling pretty good there. Thompson coho in this model run with last year's fisheries, we're at 6% total exploitation rate on a 10% objective. So looking good there as well. Some of the Puget Sound stocks we look at, the majority look good. I will point out Snohomish in this model run, the Snohomish expected spawning escapement would be 43,222, which is a ways below the 50,000 goal. And there's also part of the rebuilding plan, there is also a 55,000 spawning escapement objective in there as well. Continuing along, and sorry, I've scrolled too far on the spreadsheet. Let me make sure I'm on the right row here. Over to Hood Canal. That one also is below our spawning escapement objective in this run. So we're getting 11,234 spawning escaped there on a 14,350 goal. So that's a bit of a problem, and that stock is in overfish status this year, like I mentioned earlier. The total exploitation rate on that stock in this model run is 44.6. So we would be just under the 45% exploitation rate cap there. And then lastly, I'll touch on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Again, that stock remains in overfished status. The total exploitation rate is a 20% goal with a kind of a sub goal of 10%. And on that, we're at 9.1% total. So we're under there with a spawning escapement of 6,649. The spawning escapement goal there is 11,000. Sorry, 11,000. So that's kind of the highlights. Anybody have any questions, or Kyle, would you like me to add anything else?
I don't think so. I'll just add that of the Puget Sound stocks, I kind of expect Snohomish to be the one that pre-terminal fisheries are planned around. As you said, they are rebuilding but not rebuilt. The co-managers have been trying to get a better escapement, not fishing up to the allowable exploitation rate, but a lower rate, and trying to get close to that 55,000 that you mentioned. So I expect that'll be a lot of the Puget Sound discussions this year. But I will open it up if anybody has other questions for you. Doesn't look like it. Do you have the Chinook now as well? I can pull it up if you don't, but maybe just take a quick look at that.
I don't have it handy. If you can get to it quicker than I can.
Did that pop up?
Looks good to me.
All right, so this is just essentially the same thing that that Kyle just talked through for Coho. It is this year's forecast with last year's fisheries. This is the really stock specific Puget Sound output from the model. Everything, there are a couple places where we're above exploitation rate ceilings. The one that we're really going to have to keep an eye on this year is Snohomish. So I think people are aware Stillaguamish has really driven inside fisheries in recent years. With last year's fisheries, it's actually below its exploitation rate ceilings, but Snohomish is at a lower abundance. This red below LB is below lower bound. So that means it's below the lowest low abundance threshold, where we are below the exploitation rate ceiling limits, but the Puget Sound Chinook Resource Management Plan says that the co-managers will discuss what additional actions might be taken when we fall to this abundance. So I am expecting Snohomish to drive a lot of the Chinook discussion inside. Of more interest to the ocean and the Columbia River is probably the Thule rate, which with last year's fisheries is at 38.6%, and we have a 38% ceiling this year. So just the changes in abundances, lower overall abundance coming out of the Columbia River, that Thule rate is higher with last year's fisheries and this year's abundances. I was going to ask Jeremy if he could just give us an update. Usually this is about the time we get the council or the guidance letter to the council from Nymphs. I know they've been working on it this week, but see if they could just give us a quick update on when we might see that.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. And so we are working the guidance letter through clearance kind of as I speak. We would be hopeful that we could get it to the council today, but to be honest, I won't be surprised if it doesn't get released through our final clearance this coming Monday. This is one of the years when the March council meeting is in the earlier part of March, and so it's a bit rushed for when we need a variety of the forecasts in order to set guidance up and down the coast. So I guess one thing that folks may be able to look at relative to issues for the upcoming council meeting is we do have the Nymphs report, at least in the current briefing book. I might point to folks' attention to that, where we do indicate it looks like Hood Canal Coho meet the criteria as an overfished stock. We give some updates on other overfished situations, but I'll stop there and see if that at this point provides an update for folks.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. Any questions for Jeremy?
Kyle, it's Joel. Let's see. Do we have a time period, number one, north of Falcon Chinook abundance relative to the orca thing?
I know modeling staff has been working on that. I don't know that they're finished with that work, but I expect it'll be done pretty quickly. I might ask Mr. Carey, if I know he's been involved in that, if he knows the current status.
Thanks, Kyle. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I may have missed my introduction earlier. I was having some issues here. Yeah, it's a bit early to tell on that. We've got like you said, the preliminary run, but there's still a lot of forecasts that are not available yet. I would just say that looking at kind of the forecast relative to last year, things are looking relatively similar, maybe just slightly lower. So not terribly concerned it's going to be an issue at this point, but we won't know for sure until a little bit later. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Phil, I'd been scrolling up and down the list and I see your hand was up. I didn't know if you put it back up or if it was from before.
Yeah, I actually did put it back up. Just question for Jeremy on Queets, understanding that it was in the overfish category. We've got what appears to be some pretty robust forecast for this year. Is there anything in particular, given its status, that Nymphs will be having either in their guidance letter, and I'm sorry, I haven't looked at your report that's in the briefing book yet, but is there anything specific that we need to be cognizant of relative to the Queets?
Good question, Phil. No, I guess I can answer that simply. We do have a requirement under the MSA to where we provide an adequate progress towards rebuilding update. So we'll be performing that with the new information in the review document for Queets and updating the council at the April meeting. But we don't see anything specific that needs to be done during the March meeting and setting initial alternatives for Queets. So.
Thanks.
All right. Just making sure there are no more hands up. So we're looking at what looks like our first pretty good coho year in a while, with a strong Columbia River OPI forecast and some of our coastal stocks well up from the bad lows they've been in for a few years. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about where do we set the quotas. I think there's still a need to be somewhat cautious until we see that these big forecasts for the coastal streams pan out. We need to get out of rebuilding status, get back to healthy run sizes. So spend a fair amount of time thinking about where we might set the coho quota levels, recognizing that there's quite a bit of room to move up from where we were last year. But the sky's not the limit. Want to be a little bit cautious. I've talked to Phil a little bit. Kyle's done some work just trying to look at how many fish do we think we would need if the forecasts are right to run a full season for all of our recreational and commercial fisheries, and minimize the risk of having to close early, but not setting the quota so high that if we did miss the forecast by a little bit, we're saying oops when it's over. So that's kind of what my thinking has been going into the coho levels, setting the coho levels. I think Kyle's done a little bit of stuff he could talk through, looking at past big run sizes for the Columbia and what the fisheries did. I think Phil's done a little bit of that too. Phil, do you want to kind of tell us what you've been thinking about?
Sure. So I guess among the things I've been thinking about is, we have, as Jeremy mentioned, and as you saw in this morning's coho forecast, we have a couple of stocks of concern in Puget Sound. And while the ocean fisheries don't impact Puget Sound coho significantly, that said, several of them I think Snohomish in particular is in I think Hood Canal are both not in good shape. And so that's certainly going to be if I can think about, sometimes I think about my nerve endings. One of my nerve endings is a little bit red because of that, and just understanding that people are going to have to take some restrictions, in response to the status of those stocks. I think the other one is Thompson. I think Kyle Vandegraft said that, last year's quotas, last year's fisheries with this year's abundances has us at just under 7% or something, but that's with a relatively low coho quota in the ocean. So, and we know as we raise our coho quotas in all our alternatives, there'll be corresponding increases, maybe not proportionately, in the treaty troll. And of course, the majority of the treaty troll fishery is in the north, and where they do have higher impacts on Puget Sound coho stocks than we do further south. So that's just a consideration. We need to be mindful of the limitations we have on coho overall exploitation rates relative to the treaty that we have with Canada. That was a discussion within the Southern panel of the Pacific Salmon Commission here at their February meeting. And again, we do have some robust forecasts for coastal stocks, and so that probably isn't going to be a limiting factor, but we'll need to keep our eye on that as we go along. The other thing I looked at is I just looked back, at the last 7 or 8 years, and particularly on those years where we had similar OPI forecasts and we didn't have a big limiter coming from the Queets, and just looked at angler effort, looked at catch per unit of effort, particularly in the Columbia River area where, from a recreational perspective, they generally have the highest CPUE down there, and they're as or more dependent on coho in that area than other areas. I'm not saying the rest of the areas don't have a heavy dependence on coho, but so looking at those higher years, looking at the angler effort, looking at the CPUE and what that would mean in terms if we experienced a similar relatively high level of angler trips given and along with a high CPUE, what that might equate to in an overall quota, which would, could be considered, well, what's the need, if you will, for the ocean fisheries to have a full season, that kind of thinking. So, those are some of the considerations I was, had been thinking about, Kyle, along with just the dynamics of how we go about getting from 3 alternatives in the council process. Those then obviously go into the North Falcon process and reemerge coming into the council process in April. So, and recognizing, I would say particularly on Coho, but not to be forgotten on Chinook either, is that a lot of times when the 3 alternatives coming out of the ocean or out of the PFMC process going to the North Falcon process, the first place people go in terms of modeling is the middle option. So I'm paying particular attention and thinking about that in setting what I think would be a reasonable range of alternatives given the status of our coho stocks here, to put forward and move into the PFMC process next week. So I don't know that you were necessarily asking me for numbers. I do have some thoughts about that. when the time comes.
Thanks, Phil. And yeah, the point about the middle option being what people gravitate to as we move from March to April is definitely a real one. We've had a couple of years where that wasn't the case, but that was more because 0 was the bottom option. So I think people were looking more between the two alternatives that had fisheries. So maybe Kyle, do you want to just kind of walk through? You did something similar to what Phil was talking about. I think you went back a little further in time, looking at some of the big OPI years. You don't necessarily have to put it on screen if it's not in a nice, clean format, but kind of talk us through what you looked at and what it told you for a number of fish we needed in those years.
Yeah, maybe I will throw it on screen.
That's fine.
I have the option to share. Okay.
Kyle, huh? Kyle Vandegraaff, he's a big time Washington guy. Now this is the what they.
And can you see okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, there's a lot going on here, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. But this spreadsheet kind of has quotas for previous seasons. It's got the Coho forecasts on it in the middle column there, are kind of the Coho forecasts that are of really great importance to our ocean fisheries. So you can see, I think it'll let me highlight some stuff here, but this is the Columbia River early run, the late run, and then this is kind of the combination here. And then this is the Queets forecast. And so kind of a simple approach to get a ballpark figure here, and based on what we've done historically with these sorts of forecasts that are presented, I just went and the years that are kind of most similar, considering those stocks of importance, are 2019, 2015, 2014, 2009, and 2007. And I do recognize there are some, regime change in our fisheries. And so I stopped there rather than, going too much further. And just taking the quotas that we came out of the PFMC process with, just kind of simple average there, puts you at 186,000. So I think that's, just for a starting point, based on what we've usually been able to do historically. That was kind of my first thought. And then I also looked at over here on the right side, and hopefully that highlighting showing up. I did take a look at when those forecasts come in pretty close to predicted, and that's the blue and red coloration there is forecasting performance of the OPI index. And so 3 of those 5 years that I was looking at, the forecast came in pretty close to what was actually, or the actual return came in pretty close to what was forecasted preseason. And in those years, these were the recreational catches. And so as my approach, I decided to just treat those catches, those were actual recreational catches in our fisheries, decided to treat those as quotas, and then just back calculate to get the total, the TAC from that. So basically trying to calculate the troll portion of that, if those were the actual quotas needed to sustain the recreational fisheries during those years. And kind of that approach gave me a TAC around 160,000. So just kind of another way of looking at it, and granted, as a person in my position, I realize 5 data points, that is a pretty small sample size, but that's what we're working with here.
Thanks, Kyle. Any questions for Kyle on what he looked at here? Phil?
Yeah, appreciate Kyle doing that. And I found it, I don't know why I found it remarkable, but when I used my approach of looking at these higher years and looking at the CPUE and the anglers, I came up with very similar numbers. Maybe that shouldn't be surprising, but I I think either way that we go at it, it produces similar results. And so I think I support the kind of things that Kyle was looking at here in terms of what might help guide us into a range of alternatives, recognizing that at least for the, we've had some significant changes in fleet sizes, particularly in the charter boat industry and particularly in Westport, since 2007 to where we are now. That's also another factor just to keep in mind, that the size of the fleet is considerably smaller. The capacity to take anglers as a result is smaller now than it was back in the 2007-9 timeframe.
Thanks, Phil. Joel?
Question for Kyle, the red, white, and blue shaded column, that's postseason over preseason, or what is that? I missed that.
Hi, Joel. Yes, that's the OPI model performance. So it's essentially, and I'm trying to think if it would be pre over post or post over pre, but yes, that's the idea.
Okay. If it's post over pre, as in, or excuse me, pre over post, as in 2015, the postseason return was 3 times smaller than the preseason forecast. We don't want to show that number if we're trying to get a quota with this table. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
Well, try to represent things honestly, and of the 5 years, 2 of them were forecast poorly. I mean, or 2, I think there's a range of what that means to have a poor forecast. But yes, they were pretty well over forecast. But I will also point out, in those years, there were high quotas in the ocean fisheries, and we only caught around 50% of the quota. So we're almost kind of self-adjusting there if the forecast were to come into, if we were to have another red year on this here, I'm not too concerned from a conservation aspect.
Any other questions? If not, so I think where I'm leaning is using a number based on something like this as our middle option going into next week. Something around 185,000, and then having higher and lower options that are a set number above and below that, but not having a huge higher number, not up to the 250, 300 range we might have had in some big OPI years in the past. So maybe ask for thoughts on that from people. Joel, your hand's still up. I'm not sure if I can put it down.
Kyle, is Phil. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Gives us a little bit of room to around 185 and still have a good outcome. And I think the status of the various stocks that we depend on support a number like that. I guess I was thinking something in the neighborhood of 210 For the upper level, did not wanting to go, given the considerations that at least I talked about earlier. And if you did an equal amount from 85 down, it puts you, I think, 160 or something like that. So if you had a range of 210, 185, and 160 for Coho, that seems to me to be a reasonable place to start.
I think so as well. Any other input on those as our Coho numbers going into next week? Doesn't look like it. All right. SAS guys, did you write those numbers down?
Yeah, I was off by 5,000 on my bottom one, but looks good, Phil.
All right. Moving over to Chinook. Last year we were at 58,000. I don't remember how much shaping we had to get to that 58,000 with all the things we did, but with new abundances last year's fisheries, like I said, that put us at 38.7 with off fisheries. I think last year we wound up with the sharing a little more to the inside than in the recent past with the final package there and the squeeze for Puget Sound and parts of the ocean and all that. And not sure what inside fisheries are going to shape up like this year. Maybe Ryan, could you give us just a quick how things panned out last year, where you are in the Columbia River planning process? I know you haven't actually had any meetings yet. This is the first one, but one of the things we talked about was how you come in with your first in-river harvest rate, that type of thing, to fit in with the council runs next week. And I think that's important for us to understand.
Yeah, and I invite Cindy and Quentin to jump in and fill in any gaps or put in caveats to what I say. So, and pardon me, not looking at the screen, I'm looking at numbers. So last year's preseason, coming out of PFMC, we had a exploitation rate we used coming out of PFMC2 was just shy of 11%. And just looking at the track record, that puts us kind of in the upper sphere of what we've done over, going back to 2015, 2016. We've been higher than that before on the preseason, but not by a whole lot. So, but we have had a recent uptick in LRH use in river, primarily a sport fishery. And that, kind of reflect 2021 a little bit based on, recent years, and 2020 was one of those uptick years. So that kind of led us to where we were for a preseason approach. We did have to modify fisheries in season due to lower river tules closed down, and we, were able to kind of track, how outside fisheries are going, and then we're able to modify, closed fisheries to keep going off of, primarily Coho, and then, kind of when the tules are clear, kind of opened up Chinook again. So we definitely came in above what we planned preseason last year. That is something that I don't think anyone is surprised of, given what happened last year, and that's going to be a focal point of this year's North of Falcon, is how to shape in river fisheries with tule usage. So and maybe I'll look to Q and Cindy if there's anything else that we want to flag for the group.
No, I think you hit right on it, Ryan.
Okay. And I guess just a couple points, looking at recent run sizes, maybe that's worth noting. Postseason run in 2020 was just shy of 78,000. And then last year, our run estimate is about 74,700, and this year's forecast is 73,000. Those are all to the river mouth. So it's kind of recent returns is what we're looking at. So I can take some questions if there are any, but appreciate you providing me the opportunity to update everyone on where we were last year and what some discussion points might be this year.
Thanks, Ryan. And I asked you this just yesterday and don't know if you've had more time to dig into it, but so typically at some point next week, we would update the inside fisheries for the Columbia.
Yeah, so I think I'm going back a couple of years. We didn't at PFMC 1. I don't know why it didn't happen. So it kind of caught everyone off guard, but it was also Northern Fishery inputs got updated. So we went up and had kind of a mad dash scramble. We're avoiding that again. And we're going to basically do what we did last year in the sense of I haven't thought too far ahead of when it makes sense, but we will have it inputted into, the council runs on the at PFMC 1. So it will be in there. It's just what day is kind of the question mark. And we do have to have time to see what our last year's numbers truly lands at for consideration. And then also, obviously, this is with Oregon too. So we have to touch base with them.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for reminding me of the other piece that we don't necessarily have certainty on coming out of March, which is the Northern Fisheries. So things can move around a little just because of those between March and April. So thinking about Chinook quota levels, this is another tough one. Knowing that we are still going to have some sort of squeeze from Puget Sound stocks, even though there's not much impact on them in the ocean. And part of it is just optical, I think, of not wanting to increase too much if when we've got a stock like Snohomish where we're just not sure where it's going to land by the time we're done with all our fishery planning. I've been thinking middle option for Chinook would be something a little higher than where we landed last year at 58,000, but haven't got it clear in my mind where that should be. So maybe I'll open that up to see if people have thoughts, suggestions on that.
I have a question if I could for.
Sure, Phil.
And it's for Ryan. So how do you, when you do your initial modeling next week in conjunction with the council meeting going on, how do you decide where to start in terms of the sharing of impacts between outside and inside?
Yeah, great question, Phil. I think the first step is to know where we, kind of hinted at knowing where we truly landed last year, to see where that puts us in sharing a recent versus the long history trend. So that's one point. I think going in it, we're trying to avoid, trying to keep it, a little bit of what the in-river needed, but also kind of balancing, hearing what the discussions are for ocean. So there's kind of an understanding there. But I wouldn't say there's truly a quantitative approach, but we have a track record of what the sharing has been and kind of a desired target for in-river usage, knowing that, there'll be some shaping that will transpire as we move forward, whether that's consideration of like last year, mark selective and a piece of buoy 10 or something more than that. But yeah, just a starting place. But we're trying to keep it within bounds of what we've used in the past, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, I would observe that I think particularly in the last couple of years, the proportion of the impact
You're breaking up on us, Phil.
has trended up on the inside and on the whole breaking up.
Yeah, I've just heard a word here and there.
Well, it just came back on here. How's that?
That's better.
Okay. Well, I just, I believe, and I haven't got the numbers right in front of me, that, my observation is that in the last year, particularly last year and the year before, there's been a swing to the inside in terms of sharing of the impacts from what has happened in years prior to that. And, I think the fact that the ocean hasn't taken its quota has resulted in benefits to the inside, which is fine. So I just, I guess, cautioning against relying on the most recent year to inform how the sharing might, where we might start relative to the sharing. And that's, I guess, my observation.
Yeah, Phil, that makes sense. I mean, definitely there's last couple of years, including last year, definitely a shift to the inside as you referenced. And I can see that on the spreadsheet I'm looking at. So we want to look at as the holistic and, kind of the combo of the sharing plus the actual exploitation rates. But no, we also can look at what the plant was planned pre-season and keep that element in mind as well. And I think that's pretty key of what was planned versus where we landed. So copy that.
Anybody else have thoughts on Chinook quotas? Ryan Johnson?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks. Yeah, I figured I'd just take this opportunity to provide a little bit. The last few years we've been limited in the ocean with mid-hood canal and queets. This year, those aren't going to limit us as much. We have a increase in Spring Creek fish, which is our #1 contributing catch. On the optics thing, I worry that if we wait for a year where we see an increase in Puget Sound and in the Columbia River at the same time before we increase, we could wait a long time. So I would just hope we can look at the impacts per however many fish versus the small increase on Puget Sound impacts that we would expect if we had a quota end up higher than last year. I would ask that we leave ourselves enough room kind of with our high bookends to account for the uncertainty of the Canadian fisheries. Some moving parts inside Buoy 10 and the Puget Sound. And also just bring up what you said earlier about being stuck in, people see that middle option and they fall in love with it. So kind of at the same time, keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Joel?
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. I note that both the summers and the URBs are down this year. and they play significantly into the abundance indices that set BC fisheries. And I know that the northern fishery, Alaska, has already been set based on their preseason or their early performance, but Thule's are going to be impacted on in BC. So looking at that, I would expect less worry about what happens in Canada with the Thule numbers. So I'm also pretty worried about the Snohomish Chinook, as you were pointing out. But I don't have any data or information on how we can work around those. And so I'll just start with a question. Do you have a general sense? Is most of that impact, say, north of the Queets River, or is that a coast-wide? And I'll stand by here.
I don't have that in front of me, Joel. My assumption is that it's mostly is north of the Queets, as you said. But I can't say that for certain, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And I hate to put Mr. Carey on the spot again, but John, do you have any sense whether we're likely to see what comes out of the CTC shift our expectation for northern fisheries much, if at all, or is it too early to know?
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, kind of tough to say at this point. There's a lot of stuff going on within the CTC. As Joel had noted, the allowable catches for Southeast Alaska fisheries are essentially kind of set already based on their CPUE metric, and that allowable catch is a bit higher this year than it has been in the last few years, so that's worth considering. And then for the I guess generally for Thule's, it's going to be the West Coast, Vancouver Island, AABM fisheries that are going to have the most impact on Thule's. And for that one, maybe Upper Columbia Brights and Summer Chinook aren't as much of a player as, say, some of the other Thule stocks, maybe Spring Creek and the Puget Sound stocks as well play a big role in WCVI abundance indices too. So thinking about some of those stocks, you're looking at pretty similar forecasts, slightly higher for the Spring Creek, I think, this year, or maybe more than slightly higher, a good amount higher. So kind of thinking somewhere along the same lines of where they were last year might be a reasonable thought. But again, it's pretty early to tell, kind of hard to say for sure. There's a lot of things at play still. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
It is. Thanks a lot, John.
Sure.
Kyle?
Yes, Phil?
Yeah, I'm, and John Carey would know better than me, for sure. But I think it's really a crapshoot to the north. And the reason I say that is, I mean, here we have, URBs are down, but, by however you want to classify significant, but they're down in a significant way in my mind. Yet you have the SEAC catch ceiling going up from 205,000 last year up to 266 and some change this year. Then you overlay that with the northern BC and WCVI, where Thule start to come into play more, which is good. I mean, it's good. It just is. But you're going to have fewer URBs swimming around. So I don't know what I just don't know what to expect once those AIs, what's going to happen and how those abundance indices are going to come out. So none of that isn't helpful to anybody, but it's just it's a bit of a mixed bag this year and difficult, I think, to guess.
I don't disagree. Dave?
So another deal on that DFO, I've been doing a lot of reading on their stuff for the recreational fishery. And two of their three options is almost a third of the West Coast, all of Area 121 closed to recreational Chinook harvest. And they're closing all of Swiftsure for the whales.
Thanks, Dave. Well, I don't have a magic number in my head, but again, I'm thinking that the middle alternative is something up from last year. Not knowing where Northern Fisheries will wind up, not knowing what treaty troll might come in with. It's something around like 62,500 is a middle option, and then space the high and low around that by some number. Any thoughts on that?
Kyle, this is Cindy.
Yeah, Cindy.
This is probably a dumb question, but why would you go up on the quota if the forecast is down?
It really gets at the inside outside sharing and moving it back towards something closer to what it has been. We did a little modeling to look at what could the quota be if the in-river rate was the recent 5-year average, and that would push it up somewhere closer to 70,000. So it's really just getting at that, Cindy.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just a comment and a little bit of follow-up from before when Phil was talking to Ryan. Last year I think we put in a higher rate preseason than the previous year, and that was partly in recognition to what our fisheries were doing, relative to LRH, and we've just been seeing this exponential, in quotes, increase in some of our fisheries harvests on LRH in the lower river. So that was basically in response to that. And based on what we saw last year, it's continuing in that direction. So just adding that comment in there for folks to understand.
Thanks, Cindy. Ryan?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks. On that upper end, I had looked at some of the exploitation rates the last 4 years. I had a number that's pretty close to what I'll say now, I guess, is on that upper end. I had initially like 68,000. With the one you proposed, we'd have a pretty nice split at 67.5. And I think with the unknowns for now, that'd be a nice high bookend. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And if I do the math right, it's nice and easy, and it'd be an even split if we were at 57.5 on the lower end. Anybody else have ideas or suggestions?
Well, I'm thinking of what we're going to hear from the the Columbia River Treaty Tribes in testimony on one end of the spectrum and they obviously have a high dependence on URBs. And if our low option is 500 fish, different than it was what we ended up with last year at 58, I'm not sure that's the right message to send.
Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing about what should the low option be relative to last year, it not necessarily having to be a nice even split if we're at 67.5 or something similar in the upper end. Do you have thoughts on what would be a good number that doesn't send a bad message?
Well, I would probably do something more like 65, 60, and 55 so that we have a number that is somewhat below last year. And one, it seems to me at the 65 level, at least from the modeling I've seen, which I granted is not much yet, and the unknowns from the north. I mean, people always think, well, if it's something different in the north, it's always going to be better for us. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So I'm sorry to be the one with some cold water here a little bit on the numbers, but I'm concerned about the range that was thrown out there. And when considering the forecasts, considering what's going on in Puget Sound, as well as what I'm sure we're going to hear from the Columbia River tribes. But as I think somebody said somewhere along the way, this is the start of a long process. And whatever we do today is likely to change by the time we get to the decision coming out of the March meeting. But that's my reaction.
Thanks, Phil. And yeah, I've been struggling with the same thing. And my thoughts have been more about the Puget Sound tribes and the Columbia River tribes, just because of the 9 months of mediation we just got through to get to our new resource management plan. So I'm with you. Like I said, I didn't have a magic number in my head coming in. I've been trying to figure out what is a little increase that makes sense and doesn't cause us more problems down the road. Joel?
Hi, Kyle. I missed the discussion online on the 2nd. I had a doctor's appointment. But just the long and the short of it, the new draft management plan for Puget Sound is not in effect for this year, or are we temporarily adopting that? Thank you.
It's not in effect because it will take Nymphs close to 1.5 years to do their analysis and administrative process, but we are using essentially all the management objectives from the new plan for 2022, unless we hear something differently from NOAA in the guidance letter. I think they're going to have to clarify a few things for this first year, but essentially, yes, we're using the plan, although it won't go into effect until the future. And that exhilarating 1.5 hour video is available on YouTube if you're bored this weekend.
Thanks for the reminder.
Well, not seeing any other suggestions. I think I'm comfortable with the 55, 60, 65 range that Phil suggested. I think that's a good starting point. If we see we have room and we can move up a little from the middle, we'll do that. We'll have some shaping options that we can look at, but I think that's a good starting point for us.
Say that one more time, Kyle.
55,000, 60,000, 65,000.
So you're gonna go lower on option one?
We're
Okay.
Option 2 at 60, and then we're just 5,000 split above and below that.
Okay, not a problem. Thanks.
Hey, Kyle?
Yes, Butch.
And I think you summed it up. Last couple years, we were working from, option 2 to 3, and I think this year we'll be working from option 1 to 2 to shape probably a majority of the time. So I think that's a different what it's been for the last couple of years. And so just to put people in that mindset too. Last year we were of course shaping from very little to not much at all, and that has certainly changed for the better this year. So I think that the possibility of shaping from option 1 to option 2 is much greater than going from option 2 to option 3. So just throw that out there.
Thanks, Butch. Well, that's all I have, other than maybe a little pre-planning for next week. Does anybody else have any questions, comments about anything we've covered? Joel?
We didn't cover this. I'm just asking what the state's thoughts are on commercial troll landings in Port Angeles for this year. Our guys are some people found that option still usable last year, but very few. It's still appealing to some people this year, and there's been some interest. Thank you.
We haven't talked about that, Joel. I've heard that Nia Bay might be close to normal reopen to everybody pretty soon here. And I haven't talked to sampling staff about whether continuing to allow landings to Port Angeles is going to cause issues in the future. So we just haven't talked about it. Kyle, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, have you put any thought into that, and whether it's something we might continue even under a post-COVID more normal world?
That's kind of my train of thought there is when we can declare it post-COVID, I'd like to remove that option, but also leaving some flexibility for the unknowns.
Thanks, Kyle. So I'm flying to San Jose on Monday. I think it's just Heather, Corey, and I from the department going down. Everybody else is staying behind. We will be setting up our normal morning 7 o'clock delegation meetings, and we'll be in a room down there together. Phil will likely be down there. He might join us in the room for those. Otherwise, I'll be there Tuesday as the SAS starts their meetings to help out any way I can.
Kyle, I'm coming down on Monday afternoon also, and plan to be there starting Tuesday morning for the duration.
All right. And
really looking forward to it.
It seems a little strange to be packing the suitcase again, but it'll be good to put the last 2 years behind us. So I'll spread the word as we need to get together through the week with SAS and other ocean guys, but keep your eyes peeled for the email invitation to the morning delegation meeting. So we haven't set the actual meeting rooms up yet, but we'll do that by Tuesday. David.
Hi, thanks a lot, Kyle. David Moskowitz with Conservation Angler. It occurred to me that in 2020, there were a lot of juvenile salmon that were released that were unmarked. And I'm wondering if that, whether that was discussed. I didn't get to hear all the presentations, but I'm just wondering if anyone can shed any light, whether that is being considered by NOAA or the states in terms of what that will do to, you'll have unmarked hatchery fish coming, being fished on this year.
I don't know sort of region wide how many fish. I assume you're talking about fish that didn't get marked because of COVID and just the inability to do it. I don't know region wide how many there were. As we do our forecast, I also don't know how those were forecast, but they would go into our models as unmarked fish, even though they're hatchery fish. So it would affect it that way. But I don't know how the magnitude of it or how those fish were reported. And if anybody else online does, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll just pop in with a quick note on that, David. So in region 6, so that's the coastal region, doesn't include the Columbia River. Mark rates are incorporated into forecasts. So many of our forecast spreadsheets that go into these models, when they get sent to modelers like Derek Dapp, who I think is on the line here, when they get that information, there's multiple categories of information, right? There's ad clipped hatchery fish, there's expected numbers of unclipped hatchery fish, and then there's the unmarked natural origin fish. And so the forecast that we've got coming out of region 6 don't have that high proportion of unmarked hatchery fish, some unexpected number that we're not typical. So, we look at mark rates in the 90% and greater. So there's no wild cards there in region 6 that we're expecting this year. And then of course the team's on here so they can jump in if maybe there's some nuance there I missed, but.
And I thought most of the Western Washington fish got marked. I just up into the Columbia River. I don't know if there were places where it just didn't happen because of the pandemic. When I said region wide, I meant broader region, not just region 6.
Yeah, I might jump in there real quick. Everything James laid out on transferring to forecast with mark rates goes to FRAM. That's consistent with the Columbia River. Far as what didn't get marked, it's largely just some bright production, I believe, but largely we still got a pretty good amount marked. So I don't think there are any major hangups there for fishery consideration from that perspective, because we already have a pretty low mark rate for bright stocks anyways to start with.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think Phil.
Oh, within the Pacific Salmon Commission, the commissioners have been getting updates at every meeting relative to COVID impacts on everything from sampling to marking. And based on those reports that we received from Washington and Oregon, while there was some interruption in a limited way in some places, pretty much everything was getting done. Canada did not have the degree of success in fulfilling everything as a result of the pandemic and impacts on staff. But Alaska also reported that they were able to keep staff online and sampling and monitoring the fisheries. So to the extent that helps any with answering to that and answer to that question.
Thanks, Phil. All right, well, I think our work here is done. Thanks everybody for your time. It was just long morning session, so thanks for sticking with us, skipping your lunch and getting through this one. I will talk to many of you in the upcoming days and weeks.
Thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Kyle.
See you, Butch.
Safe travels, Jason.
Thanks, Dave.